She arrived at the wrong estate in the worst storm, and changed a cold Duke's life forever. The rain came down like judgment. It hammered the tin roof of the Rollins ranch house in sheets that sounded like buckshot, turning the yard to red mud and driving the last of the cattle under the cottonwoods along the wash. Lightning clawed the sky over the San Andres, and thunder rolled low and heavy, the kind that made a man feel small inside his own skin. Duke Rollins stood at the window with a tin cup of cold coffee in his hand, watching the water streak the glass. He had not moved in 20 minutes. The house was dark except for the fire dying in the stone hearth behind him, and the only sound besides the storm was the slow drip of water from the leak in the kitchen ceiling into the bucket he had set there 3 days ago. He was 38 years old and looked 10 years older. The lines around his eyes had been cut by wind and regret, not laughter. A thin white scar ran from the corner of his left eye to the jawbone, a souvenir from the day his brother had died on the end of a rope in Santa Fe. Duke had been there. He had not cut the rope in time. A horse screamed somewhere out in the dark. Duke set the cup down without a sound. He crossed to the rifle rack, took down the Winchester, and jacked around into the chamber. Then he opened the door. The wind tried to slam it back in his face. He stepped onto the porch anyway, hatless, coat unbuttoned. Rain struck him full in the chest and ran cold down the collar of his shirt. Out beyond the corral a shape moved, something on 4 legs, staggering. Lightning flashed again and he saw her, a woman on a blown horse, both of them half dead. The horse was a big bay, legs trembling, mouth open and bleeding from the bit. The woman clung to the saddle horn with both hands, her dress plastered to her like wet paper, dark hair streaming down her back. She saw the light from the open door and turned the horse toward it. The bay took 3 more steps and folded at the knees. She came off the side, landed hard in the mud, and did not get up. Duke stood there a long moment. The rifle was heavy in his hands. He could close the door. He could let the storm take what it wanted. He had done harder things. Instead he walked down the steps into the rain. The mud sucked at his boots. By the time he reached her the horse was still breathing but its eyes were already glazing. Duke knelt, pushed the wet hair from the woman's face. She was younger than he had thought, maybe 25. Her lips were blue. She opened her eyes and looked at him without fear, only a kind of exhausted recognition, as if she had been expecting something worse. "You're not him," she said. Her voice was raw. "No," Duke said. He put the rifle down in the mud, gathered her up, and carried her inside. She weighed nothing. Her head lolled against his shoulder and he felt the cold of her cheek through his shirt. He kicked the door shut behind them. The fire was down to coals. He laid her on the rug in front of the hearth, stripped off his coat, and dropped it over her. Then he went back out for the horse. The bay was still alive when he got there. Duke cut the saddle free, dragged the animal under the eaves of the barn, and covered it with a blanket. It would die by morning. There was nothing to be done about that. Inside, the woman had not moved. He built the fire up, fetched a blanket from the bedroom, and set a kettle on the stove. While the water heated he stood at the window again, watching the road that led down from the pass. No one would be riding in this. Not tonight. When the kettle whistled he poured the water into a basin, carried it to the rug, and knelt beside her. She was awake now, eyes following him. He soaked a cloth and began to clean the mud from her face. She did not flinch. "I was bound for the Bar T," she said after a while. "Thompson's place." Duke kept working. "You're 20 miles north of it." "I know." He wrung the cloth. Red mud ran into the basin. "Storm turned you around." "Something did." He did not ask what. He finished her face and hands, then wrapped the dry blanket around her shoulders. She sat up slowly, hugging her knees. The firelight showed the hollows under her cheekbones and the faint bruise along her jaw that had not come from the fall. "My name is Clara Voss," she said. "Duke Rollins." She looked at him then, really looked. "They said you don't take in strangers. They say a lot of things." He rose and went to the kitchen. There was cold biscuit and a tin of peaches. He brought them back on a plate. She ate like someone who had forgotten how. Between bites she told him pieces, not the whole story, the way people do when the whole story hurts too much to hold at once. Her husband had died of fever in Albuquerque 6 months earlier. The bank held the note on their little spread down by the river. The sheriff, Harlan Beck, had come with papers. Said the debt could be cleared if she signed a contract to marry Everett Thompson, who needed a wife to run his house and keep his books. Thompson was 62, owned half the valley, and had buried 3 wives already. The auction in town had been for show, the bids were fixed. Clara had signed because there was no other way to keep her father's grave from being plowed under. But the night before she was to be delivered she had taken the bay from Thompson's remuda and ridden north into the storm. "I meant to reach the mission at Mesilla," she said. "Figured the sisters would hide me till I could get east. You rode the wrong way. I was scared." She set the plate down. "Still am." Duke sat on the edge of the stone hearth and stared into the fire. The wood popped. Outside the rain kept falling, steady now, not angry anymore. He thought about the rifle still lying in the mud where he had dropped it. He thought about the wanted poster in the bottom drawer of his desk that carried his brother's name and his own description. He thought about how long it had been since anyone had slept under this roof except him. "You can stay the night," he said. "Storm'll pass by morning. Then you decide." She watched him. "Why?" "Because I can." That was all he gave her. He stood, took a lantern from the shelf, and lit it. "Bed's through there. I'll sleep in the barn." He left her sitting by the fire. The barn was cold and smelled of wet hay and horse. The bay was dead when he checked it. Duke covered the carcass with an old tarp and sat on a grain sack with his back to the wall. He did not sleep. He listened to the rain on the roof and remembered the last time he had carried a woman through a door. His wife, Sarah, the night the fever took her. He had carried her to the bed and sat beside her until the breathing stopped. That had been 9 years ago. The house had been empty since. At first light the storm had blown itself out. The sky was the color of wet slate. Duke walked the yard, boots sinking, and found the Winchester where he had left it. He cleaned it on the porch while the sun came up weak and yellow. When he went inside Clara was dressed in one of his old shirts and a pair of trousers she had belted tight with rope. She looked ridiculous and fierce at the same time. "I can ride," she said. "Where?" "Anywhere that isn't here when they come looking." He poured coffee. "They'll come." "I know." They drank in silence. The steam rose between them. Duke studied her over the rim of his cup. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of the yearling colts he used to break, wild but not broken, waiting for the next cruel hand. "You got people?" he asked. "No one that matters." He nodded once. "Then we'll see." By noon the mud had begun to crust. Duke saddled his buckskin and rode the ridge above the ranch, glassing the valley. He saw nothing moving except a pair of buzzards circling low over the wash. When he came back Clara was on the porch with a bucket, scrubbing the mud from the floorboards. She had rolled the sleeves of his shirt past her elbows. The bruise on her jaw had darkened. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I do." He let her. That evening they ate beans and salt pork at the kitchen table. The lamp threw soft light on the walls. Duke spoke more than he had in months. Not much. He told her about the year the river flooded and took half his herd. About the time he and his brother had driven cattle to Abilene and lost 3 men to Comanches. He did not tell her about the hanging. She did not ask. She told him about the auction in Lincoln. How the men had stood in the saloon and bid on her like she was a brood mare. How Everett Thompson had smiled the whole time, gold teeth shining. How the sheriff had watched from the corner and said nothing. Duke listened without interrupting. When she finished he pushed his plate away and said, "Beck's crooked. Always has been. I figured. He'll come tomorrow. Thompson too." Clara looked at her hands. "I can leave tonight. Spare you the trouble." "No." The word came out flat. She glanced up. "I said you could stay the night," Duke said. "I didn't say how many nights." She almost smiled. It was the first time. They slept in separate rooms. Duke lay awake listening to the house settle. Once he heard her cry out in her sleep and he rose, stood in the hallway, but did not open the door. He went back to bed. Morning brought riders. 3 of them came up the road just after sunup. Sheriff Beck on a gray horse, a deputy named Cobb, and Everett Thompson himself in a black frock coat and a hat too fine for the country. Duke was waiting on the porch with the Winchester across his knees. Clara stood inside the doorway, out of sight. Beck reined up 10 yards out. He was a thick man with a mustache like a broom and eyes that never quite met yours. "Morning, Rollins." "Beck. We're looking for a woman. Clara Voss. She was supposed to be delivered to Mr. Thompson yesterday." Duke said nothing. Thompson leaned forward in the saddle. His voice was oily. "She's my property, Rollins. Signed contract. Legal. Signed under duress," Duke said. Beck smiled without humor. "Duress ain't a word we use much out here. You got her or not?" Duke stood slowly. The rifle stayed pointed at the ground but his thumb was on the hammer. "She's not property." Thompson's face tightened. "You interfering with a lawful debt, Cowboy?" "I'm interfering with you." Cobb shifted, hand drifting toward his pistol. Beck raised a gloved hand to stop him. "Let's not get hasty. Rollins, you know how this goes. We can do this peaceable or we can do it the other way. Either way she comes with us." Duke looked at Thompson. "You bury wives faster than most men change shirts." Thompson's smile thinned. "That's none of your concern." "It is now." The air felt heavy, the way it does before a shot. Beck's horse stamped. Somewhere behind the barn a meadowlark called once and stopped. Clara stepped onto the porch. She had braided her hair tight and wore Duke's old canvas coat. She looked small but straight. "I'm here." Beck's eyes narrowed with satisfaction. Thompson's smile returned. Duke did not move. "She stays." Beck sighed. "You want to die over this, Rollins? You already got enough ghosts." The words landed like a stone in still water. Duke felt the old scar on his face pull tight. He thought of his brother swinging. He thought of Sarah's cold hands. He thought of every time he had stepped aside because it was easier. He raised the Winchester. "Not today," he said. Thompson laughed once, short and ugly. "Shoot him, Cobb." Cobb cleared leather. Duke fired. The shot took Cobb in the shoulder and spun him out of the saddle. The deputy hit the mud and lay still. Beck's horse reared. Thompson clawed for the pistol under his coat. Duke worked the lever, fast and calm, and put a bullet through the crown of Thompson's hat. The man jerked back, blood starting from his scalp. Beck had his own gun out now. He fired once, wild. The bullet splintered the porch post beside Duke's head. Duke shot him in the leg. The sheriff screamed and dropped the revolver. It was over in 4 seconds. Thompson sat his horse bleeding, eyes wide. Beck was on the ground clutching his thigh. Cobb groaned once and was quiet. Duke walked down the steps. Mud sucked at his boots. He took their guns, one by one, and threw them into the water trough. Then he stood over Beck. "You tell the judge it was self-defense," he said. "You tell him the contract was coercion. You tell him anything else and I'll come looking for you in the dark." Beck's face was gray. "You're a dead man, Rollins." "Maybe." Duke turned to Thompson. "Get off my land. Take your trash with you. And if I ever see you near her again I'll finish what I started." Thompson did not argue. He and Beck helped Cobb into the saddle. They rode out slow, leaving 3 trails of blood in the mud. When they were gone Duke lowered the rifle. His hands were steady. Clara came down the steps and stood beside him. She was shaking. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know." She looked at the blood in the yard. "What happens now?" He thought about it. The ranch was all he had left. The land was good but the bank had been circling for years. Beck would come back with more men. Or worse, with papers. "We bury the horse," Duke said. "Then we pack light." She turned to him. "You're leaving." "We're leaving." The word sat between them like a promise neither had expected. They worked through the afternoon. Duke dug a grave for the bay behind the barn while Clara packed what little she had and what he could spare, 2 blankets, a sack of coffee, the Winchester, a change of clothes. He saddled the buckskin and a paint gelding he had been saving for spring. When the sun dropped low they stood in the empty house. The fire was out. The bucket under the leak was full. Duke looked around once, then walked out without locking the door. They rode west into the desert as the light failed. The stars came out hard and bright. Clara rode beside him, quiet. After a mile she spoke. "Why me?" He kept his eyes on the horizon. "Because once I let a woman die because I did nothing. I won't do it twice." She was silent a long time. "Then, I won't let you lose everything for me." "You already did." The desert stretched ahead, empty and wide. They camped that night in a dry wash under an overhang. Duke built a small fire and they sat shoulder to shoulder against the rock. The heat felt good after the rain. He passed her the last of the peaches. She ate half and gave the rest back. "I never asked your story," she said. "You don't have to." "I want to." So he told her. Not all of it, but enough. The brother. The rope. The way the crowd had cheered. The way he had ridden out of Santa Fe with a price on his head and nothing else. The years alone on the ranch, growing hard because it was safer than soft. The way he had started to believe he deserved the silence. When he finished she reached over and touched the scar on his face with 2 fingers. The touch was light. He did not pull away. "You're not cold," she said. "You're just tired." He looked at her in the firelight. Something inside him shifted, small but real, like the first crack in winter ice. They rode for 3 days. The country grew rougher, red rock and juniper. They avoided the stage road. At night they talked more. She told him about her husband, how he had been kind but weak, how he had died whispering her name. Duke told her about the cattle drives, the nights under the stars when the herd was quiet and a man could almost believe the world was clean. On the 4th day they reached the town of Socorro. Duke sold the paint for enough money to buy supplies and 2 train tickets east. The depot was dusty, the ticket agent half blind. While Clara waited on the bench Duke walked to the telegraph office and sent a wire to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe. It was short. It told the truth about Beck and Thompson and the contract. He signed it with his real name. When he came back she was standing beside the tracks, hat in her hand, wind lifting her hair. "They'll come for you," she said. "Maybe. What if they do?" He looked down the rails. "Then I'll face it." She stepped close. "I'm not leaving without you." The words were simple. They landed in him like rain on dry ground. The train came in late, steam and iron and the smell of coal. They boarded together. The car was nearly empty. They sat side by side on the wooden bench as the whistle blew and the wheels began to turn. Duke watched the desert slide past the window. The ranch was behind him now, the house empty, the yard drying in the sun. He felt the loss like an old bruise, not sharp anymore. Beside him Clara slept with her head on his shoulder. Her breathing was steady. He did not move. Somewhere east of Albuquerque the conductor came through calling stations. Duke woke her gently. "You still sure?" he asked. She looked at him a long moment. The bruise on her jaw was fading. "I was never sure of anything till now." He nodded once. The train rolled on. Outside the window the land opened up into grassland and distant mountains. Duke felt something loosen in his chest he had not known was knotted. Not forgiveness. Not peace exactly. Just room. Room for whatever came next. They rode the rails for 4 days. In Kansas City they changed trains. Clara bought a dress with the last of the horse money, simple blue calico. Duke shaved in the depot washroom and looked at himself in the cracked mirror. The scar was still there. The eyes were still tired. But something behind them had shifted. They found work in a small town in Missouri. Duke hired on at a livery stable breaking horses. Clara took a job at the mercantile keeping books. They rented 2 rooms above the blacksmith's shop and lived quietly. No one asked questions. At night they sat on the narrow porch and listened to the town wind down. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they did not need to. One evening in early autumn Duke came home with a cut on his forearm from a spooked colt. Clara cleaned it by lamplight. Her hands were gentle. When she finished she did not let go. "You could have died back there," she said. "I know. I would have hated that." He looked at her. The lamp made her eyes soft. "I wouldn't have hated living long enough to see this." She leaned in and kissed him. It was not hurried. It was not desperate. It was the kind of kiss that says the past is still there but it does not own tomorrow. They were married in the little white church at the end of the street 2 weeks later. The preacher was old and half-deaf. The witnesses were the blacksmith and his wife. Duke wore a borrowed coat. Clara wore the blue calico. When the preacher asked if he took her, Duke said yes without hesitation. His voice was quiet but clear. Afterward they walked back through the falling leaves. She slipped her hand into his. He did not pull away. News came in the spring. A letter from the territorial marshal. Beck had been removed from office. Thompson had sold out and left the territory. The contract had been declared invalid. The Rollins Ranch, Duke's ranch, still stood. The bank had held it in trust. It was his if he wanted it. Duke read the letter twice. Then he folded it and set it on the table. Clara watched him from across the room. "You want to go back?" He thought about the empty house, the leak in the kitchen, the grave behind the barn. He thought about the silence that had lived there for so long. "I want to go home," he said. "But only if you come with me." She smiled. It was the kind of smile that changes the shape of a room. "I already did." They sold what little they had and bought 2 good horses and a pack mule. The journey west took 6 weeks. They traveled slow, stopping at night under open sky. Duke taught her how to read sign. She taught him how to laugh without looking over his shoulder. When they reached the ranch, the house was still standing. The roof had sagged a little more. The yard was overgrown with grass. But the cottonwoods were green and the river ran clear. Duke stood in the doorway a long time. Clara waited beside him. "It's smaller than I remember," he said. "It's ours," she said. They went inside together. He fixed the leak that same afternoon. She swept the floors and opened the windows. That night they built a fire in the hearth and sat on the rug where she had first lain soaking wet. The flames painted the walls gold. Duke stared into the fire. "I used to think this place was punishment." Clara leaned against him. "And now?" "Now it feels like starting over." She took his hand. The scar on his face caught the light. He turned and kissed her forehead. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. Somewhere far off a coyote called once and was answered. Inside the house, two people sat close, breathing the same air, carrying the same ghosts, but no longer alone with them. Duke Rollins had arrived at the wrong place once too. He had been riding away from everything for years. A woman had ridden into the wrong storm and stepped onto his porch. She had not asked him to change. She had simply stayed until the cold cracked. In the morning they would ride the boundaries of the ranch. They would mend fences and brand the few cattle that had gone wild. They would speak of the future in quiet sentences. But for now they sat by the fire and let the silence hold them the way it had once held only pain. The storm was long over. The wrong turn had become the only road that mattered. And Duke Rollins, the quiet cowboy who had once believed he was finished with living, finally began.